Around the world, women still fight to be treated as equals. And right now, as Canada examines its own place on the global stage, 3 impressive women join us to discuss what it takes to lead. Please welcome, closest to me to furthest, the Honourable Paulette Senior, Senator for Ontario, Cynthia Wesley-Esquimaux, Indigenous Chair for Truth and Reconciliation in Canada for Lakehead University, and Alexandra Chyczij, President of the Ukrainian Canadian Congress. Please, a round of applause for these women. So as a child, I came to Canada as a refugee, and I learned how to speak English by watching TVO, shameless plug, but I also watched Mr. Rogers, and Mr. Rogers always said to look for the helpers, and that is something that I wanted to be when I grew up. So I'd like to ask all of you this question. What has been your North Star for the work that you do? Senator, I'd like to start with you. You've worked in the nonprofit sector with a focus on gender equity. How did that lead you to the position that you hold now?
Well, I didn't start with gender equity because, you know, as a girl, young woman growing up, issues around gender inequity kind of hits you at a certain point, you know, and then you kind of reflect and you think, okay, so that's what I've been dealing with, right?
Can you remember an age when something happened that kind of taught you that's what was going on?
I was in my teens, and there was something that I recognized that happened that I knew had to do with gender. And I was in a situation where there was abuse that was happening, and I noticed that the way the officer, and we're talking like in the late 80s, so the way the officer dealt with the spouse compared to how he dealt with the man compared to how he dealt with the woman was very different. And so I thought to myself, why is that happening? There's an assumption that the woman should actually know her place, you know? So I kind of registered that, and I was in sort of like my mid to late teens at the time.
And as a teen, it told you what?
Well, it told me that there was something that I had to do, and I did. I actually picked up the phone and called the lawyer and made sure that she knew that this officer should not actually be engaged in this situation. And I can't tell you what made me do that. I just realized that something was wrong and I had to do something about it.
So you saw the injustice.
I saw the injustice, I saw the unfairness, and so an action was taken. And so that's something that I've always treasured. And you know, my career actually began in communities addressing issues for vulnerable people, for families, for women, for children, for youth. And I really loved it because I had a deep-seated love for community. It's community where I raised my son. It's a community where my family lived, all my siblings, my nieces. And so I wanted to actually work on building a community that works for everyone. And so that is still my North Star.
I love that because I think a lot of us, when we see all the things that are going on in the world, it can be overwhelming, but community seems to be something that people are drawn to. And Cynthia, you've dedicated your life to building bridges of understanding and education. Would you say that's been your North Star?
Oh, for sure. I come from a vulnerable community as well, so that's something that that has been a part of my life from the beginning. So I've really paid a lot of attention to that. But the thing that actually made it possible for me, I think, was the fact that I had an auntie who taught me how to read at 4 years old, and I've been reading ever since. And I think the fact that I have a doctorate today goes all the way back to the fact that books became the piece that made my life worth living. It took me places that I needed to go to when I couldn't actually go there physically. It taught me how to use the language well, because even if you speak English doesn't necessarily mean you speak it well. so learning, I think, has been the thing that, and I guess the driving force was the need to know.
Right.
I just need to know.
And the understanding part of it, how does education maybe help us understand other communities and the world around us?
It broadens your mind. You go to places that you may never see. You go to other countries, you meet other people, you peek into minds that person may be long gone, you'll never ever have an opportunity to meet them. And you also read books from people that you know, Wab Kinew, for instance, as the Premier of Manitoba, he had a little bit of a shaky, and then I read his book and I'm like, oh, okay, I get it, I get it.
Well, Sabine, in her introduction for us, mentioned civility, and we are going to talk about the toxic nature of politics, especially when it relates to women.
Yeah.
We keep hearing from politicians that we live in a divisive world, people are divided. I think the opposite myself. But how do you think understanding can help to bridge those conversations?
Because it gives you an open window to people as they are. And also, like when I look at somebody, I see that there's a person standing in front of me, but there's a whole world behind them. And that means no judgment and understanding. Because it's like, it's not who are you or what's wrong with you, it's what happened to you when there's a conflict. And what am I dealing with here? And so I think it opens our minds very broadly. We can live in a small bubble, or we can open that bubble and actually really engage the entire planet, the entire, Leora Lederer calls it the multiverse.
The multiverse, I love that.
It's not just the universe, it is the multiverse. And I think we need to embrace that.
I'm also a Spider-Man nerd, so that means something else for us nerds. But Alexandra, you went from leadership in the legal world to representing Ukrainians in a crucial moment in their country's history. What experiences helped you to prepare for that moment?
So I'm the child of post-World War II immigrants who came to Canada fleeing Nazi and Soviet occupation in Ukraine. They, along with several million Balts and other East Europeans, fled west into Germany and Austria, where they were placed into labor camps. My mother worked in a munitions factory at the age of 14. They then emigrated to Canada. They were sponsored by a distant family relative and came to Canada with nothing. In fact, they came with debt. And they weren't called refugees then because the term didn't exist until 1951, so they were displaced persons. And I grew up on the stories that my parents told me. My grandmother's role in our family was to put the children to bed. And she didn't tell us fairy tales or we didn't count sheep. She told us stories of our homeland, of the Soviet terror, the NKVD knocking on the door in the middle of the night and taking away their friends and family, never to be seen again. And so those stories ring true today because of what is happening in Ukraine today. It's a real sense of déjà vu for me.
To speak about that déjà vu, because you've said that you have an obligation toward your fellow Ukrainians and that you want to pay it forward. In your position, like considering your family's history and how they came to this country, you're now in a position to advocate for your community, and a lot is at stake. How do you do this work while I imagine also grieving what is happening to Ukrainians and Ukraine?
So I allow myself to cry once a day, and then anger, adrenaline, and coffee take over, and I get through the rest of the day. It's an ever constant voice that is in the back of my head all the time. I can never forget about what's happening in Ukraine, the daily bombing. And just as my parents were welcomed to Canada by Canadians at the time, we now have an obligation to our fellow Ukrainians to welcome them. And we are incredibly grateful to all Canadians who opened their hearts and their homes to those who came here after February 2022. These people too are not refugees because they don't qualify under the UN definition. They are not being persecuted by their own homeland, and they do want to return home eventually. So they are displaced persons. So my legal training helped me to work with Minister Sean Fraser at the time to develop the special visa for Ukrainians to come here and work here temporarily until the war ends. Of course, that very topic is being discussed in Washington today. Right. But it's, you know, an incredible sense of obligation that I have and all of my diaspora community around the world to help close to 8 million people who were forced to flee Ukraine because of the war.
I just wanted to do a quick follow-up because you mentioned your legal background being able to help you in the moment right now. What you just said about how you process it, like you take a minute each day to process what's happening and your personal connection to it. What do you think your parents would say if they saw the work that you're doing for your community now?
I'm glad that my parents didn't live to see this day because it would have been incredibly traumatic for them. I think my mother would have expected no less of me. She always taught me to give back to my community. It was my obligation to repay all those volunteers who spent time, you know, at camps as counselors and in my various activities, and so it was my duty to do that. But my mother would have been incredibly traumatized. She was, every time she heard an ambulance, she froze because it reminded her of the air raid sirens during World War II.
I think that when we talk about jobs, we sometimes forget like the lived experience and what lived experience can bring to those positions. And I imagine throughout your careers, you probably had the challenges, the failures, the joys, and the victories. And I'd like to talk a little bit more about those things. Senator, how does your expertise in gender and equality shape your decision-making as a senator?
Well, you know, I'm so honored to now occupy a seat in the Senate, and it allows me to be able to take everything that I've done in my life with the organizations I had the honor to lead on addressing serious issues in this country, particularly around gender-based violence. And gender-based violence, as it touches and destroys families right across this country, it continues to be a huge scourge in Canada.
It was actually declared an epidemic by the Liberal government.
It's been an epidemic declared by many municipalities around the country, some provinces, as well as the federal government. We know the extraordinary negative impact it's had, particularly on Indigenous communities, racialized communities. It continues to be a problem. And so we really need to make sure, particularly in the role I'm occupying, that I'm using my voice and the privilege I have as a senator to continuously raise the issue, to make sure that organizations that are doing the fundamental work of saving lives in Canada, as well as protecting the lives of children who end up in gender-based violence, that they are also being funded to do the work. And so we're at a critical time in this country. We've never had the geopolitical reality that we've had. And so there are many challenges to meet. The one in front of us for sure, but also we can't forget the most vulnerable people in this country, whatever that vulnerability is. Gender-based violence is critical, and so, you know, it is important that we prioritize those issues and not forget about that when we're thinking about how we're budgeting. I am deeply concerned about that, as you can tell.
I'm gonna come back to that, and this is the cuts to wage.
Yeah.
I'm gonna bring that up
But
back again.
It's really important that I use my voice to address gender-based violence in Canada, but also human rights issues broadly. And so I'm very concerned about what's happening on around issues of poverty, around the lack of housing, around you know, people who are incarcerated for crimes they never committed. So I'm using my voice in that respect on a daily basis. I have the new role of chairing the Human Rights Committee for the Senate. And so I'm looking forward to the work we'll be able to accomplish there.
And Cynthia, what about you? How does gender equality come into play in the work that you do?
Well, it comes, just as the senator said, it comes into play on a regular basis because domestic violence and gender-based violence is not particular to any group. Everybody is experiencing it. But I think it's a really important thing to try to, one of the things I encourage people to do, especially women, is to mentor. We want to mentor our young women into understanding that it's not okay, that there are, and it's hard when you grow up I grew up in a household with domestic violence. And I remember thinking, I don't want that. I don't want to live with, and I have not been in a relationship with domestic violence because I refuse to actually even, you raise your hand to me, I'm out the door. See you later. And we have to teach our young women and our young men that that is not the way to resolve conflict.
I'm glad you brought up young men because we're 4 women here on a panel. I think we're on par with a lot of issues when it comes to gender equality. What role can men play in these conversations? Because sometimes I feel like we're just kind of like screaming into the void.
No, we have to teach. And there's a moose hide campaign that has been very successful across Canada. My husband is a social worker. He's a very gentle man. He's always talking to other men about the necessity of understanding. I mean, he's just as confounded by women as other men. I'm not saying I get it.
We're very complex and
exactly.
magical creatures.
But he also appreciates the value of women. He calls it women's spirit. He said, I love women's spirit. And in fact, he's a social worker. He works with 9 other women. He's the only man in his office. So he gets it. But I think that it's really important for us to talk to our young men, and we need to applaud our young men as well, because sometimes they get let out of the conversation, and they don't really see the role. And we've removed roles. I mean, look at our society today. We don't live in a straightforward society anymore. It's not clearly defined what the roles of women are, what the roles of teenagers are. We didn't even have teenagers 100 years ago. You were working, gone. Right? So we've created all these. Our children are not working children. They're emotional addendums to our families now. We want different things for them. So we really have to think about that. And I often say to my community, look at 7 generations went through residential schools where they could not express laughter, anger, fear, all those. They had to shut it all down. So you imagine what it's like trying to raise families emotionless. And even though we're that far out, and both my parents went to residential school for 20 years between them, and even after that, my trying to raise my children and understand how do you express and teach emotion that you've never observed before is tough. Now, thankfully, I've got girls, but I see with young men that if you're going to be angry, how do you do that? You don't use it as a sword. You use it as an emotion that's perfectly legitimate. So there's a lot of educational experience that needs to happen in all of our communities, because it's not just Indigenous people that are experiencing domestic violence. It goes all the way from the bottom to the top. I don't care how rich you are or how poor you are, there's always things happening in our families and an inability to really express ourselves in a very good way because we're not taught how to do that. And a lot of people, I'm looking at this room, it's full of people. I bet you if I started asking you how many of you have viewed domestic violence in your families, how many of you have experienced it directly, and how many of you are hiding it out, that a lot of people would be able to raise their hands. So let's be real about it and call it out and work with our kids in a good way so they understand that it is not the way to go.
When you said about emotions, it made me think, it's okay.
She threw a shoe.
You can get your shoe. It's these chairs. So with you as well, Alexandra, you're working to welcome Ukrainians to Canada into, and first of all, they're dealing with displacement, war, all the things that come with being removed from your country and what's going on to the people, your loved ones that are still there, and then they're moving to a different country. How does gender inequality present itself in the work that you do?
Well, most of those coming to Canada are women with children because men are not allowed to leave the country. They're being mobilized for the army. Yeah. So all of the complexities that come with single parenting and not having a support network. And that's where our community comes into play with community events and opportunities for women to bond in that first summer, my sister, who is a psychologist, organized a camp for a retreat for women with their children, so that the Canadian camp counselors took care of the children so that the women could heal and share their own experiences. And of course, back home in Ukraine, it's very complex because you have men who come home from the war, who are suffering from PTSD. The mental health system in Ukraine needs a lot of work. Ukrainians are resistant to admitting that they suffer from mental health issues, although that is now becoming much more acceptable. And your colleague, Senator Stan Kuchar, is very engaged in that issue in terms of providing a more robust mental health system in Ukraine.
So tackling the stigma around that.
Yeah.
And again, you mentioned like the camp. Again, we're coming together in community, which is so important these times. I think you wanted to say something before, Senator, before your shoe fell off?
Yeah, and then my shoe fell. But just sort of going back to the gender-based violence issue and this division that we're having in terms of how we parent, but also young men, young women, just this gender division, it is so problematic. And then it makes it, I'm thinking of a film, I don't know how many have seen it, called, is it Teenager or something?
Adolescent.
Adolescence.
Right, the Netflix show.
On Netflix.
Yes, if you haven't seen it, it's worth seeing just for an education about what's the world that our young people are living in, because we have no clue.
No,
And it really is about the impact of social media, but the depths that it can go to in terms of the education that our young people are getting, and what different things mean that we are clueless about as parents trying to raise healthy children. And so I think it is really important that we understand that the world that they live in, it doesn't resemble the world any of us live in. And the messages that they're getting from various sources around how to be a girl, a boy, a man, or all that kind of stuff, it's very different. And so it leads to the issues that young people are experiencing in a way that we are left clueless as to how do we address it. You know?
Senator, in that film, the police officer has to rely on his son. To explain to him what's really going on.
And so I just think it's important that we understand that there's a huge gap.
There is, as I'm raising two preteens, so it's very hard. Where as always happens, our conversations fly, and I want to move forward a little bit. You were talking about wage a little bit before.
Yes.
So Canada has begun to rethink its place in the world. You all work with international partners. I wanted to get a sense, some thoughts from you on how our country is seen abroad. And Senator, you brought up what's happening with wage, Women and Gender Equality Canada. I think Canada right now is, there's opportunities for us to lead where other countries are maybe pulling back, especially when it comes to gender equality. How does Canada stack up on the world stage, and what are your concerns around the potential cuts to wage?
Well, you heard a little bit about that already. But I've had the opportunity to sit on the G7 Gender Advisory Council for when it was in Germany, when it was in Italy, and then Canada this year. And so I've had the opportunity to work with colleagues from different countries around how we stock up when it comes to gender equality. In some areas we're doing well. I think the perception is that Canada is doing better than most countries, but that's not necessarily the case. When it comes to how we respond to issues around, let's say, women sitting on boards or women being elected, and et cetera. We are not doing well in terms of women in elected positions. What's missing is that we actually haven't had the opportunity in Canada to have that conversation about women being in elected positions. We've had one woman prime minister in this country, and she was not elected, she was appointed, the Honourable Kim Campbell. And she's a woman I have the highest respect for because she held the role. But I think it's way past time that we see ourselves being able to elect a woman prime minister in this country, you know? We've seen it at the provincial level where we've had several women premiers, for example, and that number has gone up and down. But compared to the rest of the world, we are kind of like in the middle of the pack when you compare it to G7 countries and then further G20 countries. In countries like Norway and other northern European countries, they've actually done quite well. Some have introduced quotas. There are many of us who are not supportive of quotas, but we can't seem to make the stride forward without the quotas. Right? So there really is a problem in terms of what is it that we want to accomplish? Are we serious about moving forward in terms of women's leadership in this country at the political level and as well as at the corporate level, quite frankly? But I think it's important that we actually have that real conversation in terms of what's going to work because the incentives have not worked.
Cynthia, I saw you nodding.
I think they have to go back to, so the Haudenosaunee people of this country had the Great Law. And in the Great Law, women were equally represented. In fact, Benjamin Franklin looked at the Great Law and it helped to craft the United States Declaration. But they took out the women. But in our culture, women have an equal role. We have been affected by paternalism, there is absolutely no question, and missionization, you know, that reduced the role of women. But women had a voice, and in fact, in the early days, you would look at the history, many Europeans called our governments petticoat governments because women had a say. But we still have a say today, although it may not be up front and center. Because I remember when we had one of the national chiefs who did something that wasn't quite acceptable to the women in our communities across Canada at the national election. It was the women who told their husbands, "You're not voting for him." And he did not get in. So there are ways, you know, and even my grandmother was Haudenosaunee. Even there, it's the women who appoint the chiefs, and it's the women that can dehorn him. So it is a man, but it is the women who hold that responsibility to choose and train and appoint the leadership. So there's some lessons that can be learned from the foundations of this country, from the first peoples of this country, that actually demonstrate clearly and unequivocally that women stand equal to men. Maybe their roles are somewhat different. That's no crime. I mean, you know, men are stronger in certain ways and women are stronger in others. And I think we need to really start to come back to the idea that humanity is, we're all equal. And address those roles more appropriately.
So there's opportunities for collaboration. Cynthia, I just wanted to do a quick follow-up, because in the work that you do, you've had the opportunity to travel abroad. How is Canada seen globally in terms of Indigenous rights?
People are looking at Canada for some very specific instruction. We have come through the Truth and Reconciliation Commission process. I've been to Norway, I've been to Sweden, I've been to Taiwan, I've been to Brazil. I've been to several countries who are saying, how did you do it? And how can we do it? And how do we lift our Indigenous populations into those places? What do we need to do? And again, that whole idea around gender equality is going to be one of those things. Language, the restoration of language is an incredibly important part that has been pushed down, because we know in our languages is our cultures, it is our understandings, whether you speak English or whatever you speak, because English is also a language, in case you forgot. But you know, I think we're seeing, from the Indigenous perspective, we have been going back and forth to the World Court for a very long time. The United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People did not just happen. It had took over 125 years of going back and forth to the World Court and having those conversations at the United Nations. And we did it, and we stuck to it. And that's what it's going to take. It's going to take some fortitude, it's going to take some stick-to-itiveness, and it's going to be voices being raised. As the Senator has said, use your voice. That's why you were given it. And we need to, you know, we need to stand together. And a lot of men are willing to do that. I mean, I know there's still paternalism in this country and everywhere else around the world, but hey, the only way things change is when we actually get engaged with it.
Yeah, and have those hard conversations.
Yes, have those hard
We're running out of time, and so I want to switch to politics. Alexandra, how do you think Canada is seen politically around the world?
Well, I mean, we have a cabinet that's fairly gender balanced. I think we're almost 50-50, but only 30% of elected MPs are women. We've had, in the last few years, women give birth while sitting in Parliament, which is something that's pretty novel. But Canada's international foreign aid is built around feminist principles. And I know that when I traveled to Ukraine in 2018 with then Minister of International Development, Marie-Claude Bibeau, I witnessed the projects that Canada was sponsoring. They had built shelters for women in eastern Ukraine, which was occupied at the time. That happened in 2014 when the Russians moved into Crimea and the Donbass. So you had men fighting in eastern Ukraine. And again, all those problems with PTSD and domestic violence, they had mobile domestic units that traveled to the homes where they were getting emergency calls. So that's all Canada and international partners doing that work. And we have some wonderful NGOs in Canada like War Child, who are assisting victims of sexual violence in Rwanda, in East Africa. So this is, Canada does have a footprint in this on the international stage.
Would you ever run for politics?
Didn't see that coming.
Let's just say I've been courted many times, but resisted.
Why? How come?
Because I've been active in various campaigns. I have seen the life of an MP. It's incredibly difficult, and especially, I was a single parent. So I couldn't abandon my child to spend half of my time in Ottawa. And so that precluded that for me.
Because I don't think we can talk about gender equity without talking about the lack of women in politics. Around the world, this is happening around the world. Women are leaving positions of great power. And sometimes it is because we still have to take care of families and trying to find that balance, but also because we live in a digital world and it's not a very friendly place for women. Senator Senior and Cynthia, you both actually ran for office at different levels of government. I'm curious to understand why you did it. Cynthia?
Why did you do it?
Like what drove you to do it?
Civic responsibility.
Explain that a little bit, because I think we've moved away so much around conversations around responsibilities to the community. Why was that important for you?
Because I think that there's such a divide between what happens at the community level, because I work there, and what happens at governance. There's just, again, that gap. You know, we talk about different gaps between parenting and all this. There's lots of gaps that I think need to be filled. And I think, you know, I'm one of those people that's sort of hyper-responsible in so many different ways. And for me, when they asked me, I asked them the question back, well, what would happen here? My first experience, I must say, speaking of what happens, I went in, they sent us to the Parliament buildings, and they said to me, you have to go up the stairs, and there's a room at the top, and that's where the meeting is, where they're going to, you know, introduce you to what's going to be happening. And I went up the stairs and I looked in the room and all I saw were old white guys. No offense, anybody in the room. And I was like, oh. So I went back down and said, I think that's the wrong room. And they said, no, that's the right room. So I went back in, and when I went into the room all the white guys were sitting at the front and all the people of color were at the back of the room. And I was like, oh, I don't think so. So I went up to the front of the room and I said to these guys, move over, I'm sitting with you. And they're like, and I was like, really, I'm sitting with you. I am
so you
not
didn't feel intimidated?
Not at all. I'm not going to go to the back of the room. And everybody back there, come on up. Because we need to be present, visible, outspoken, honest, you know, whatever we need to be there. Put yourselves where it is happening. I'm not standing at the back of the room. So I ran, I've run in very blue, and very red. But I think, and it's tough. It is a hard thing to do.
Why did you run a blue campaign if you're red?
Hey?
You said you ran a blue?
Say it again.
I didn't understand.
Blue, conservative ridings.
Why? Why did you do that?
Because I live in conservative ridings.
Okay.
Because I live in rural ridings.
Right.
So it's mostly conservative, all of the liberal, you know, the cities. which, by the way, I've said to Trudeau, get with it. There's a lot of people moving out of cities that need that representation. But I think it's important. It's a tough thing to do, to knock on all those doors and speak to people, some who don't want to talk to you. But I think if you're representing people and their voices, you have to do it.
Yeah.
And it's worth it. I now know more about Canada than I ever wanted to know. And I know more about politics. I've made some very good friends in politics. Carolyn Bennett and I have been friends for over 14 years. And I just visited her in Copenhagen. She's now the ambassador. So we have to make friends everywhere. You know, I'm an Indigenous woman. I live on a reserve. I have a doctorate. My parents went to residential school. It takes sheer perseverance. Do what you have to do. Get people to help you. Listen to other people and let them mentor you. But, you know, there was many a time when I was giving up, including my advisor, who I said, "Are you finished crying? Get back to work."
Chin up. What about you, Senator? Elbows up. What drove you to run?
Crying may be involved.
That's okay. For sure.
And that's okay, because it's part of the journey. I loved running. I ran 3 times, and I loved the experience despite the losses, which is really awful, by the way, to lose. But I found that through the process of running, it really helped me to build community and to inspire others to know that this is something they could also do.
Yep.
Yeah.
And so I would say what I loved about it was meeting people, door knocking, engaging, having conversations, having debates, all that kind of stuff. I absolutely loved it because, as I said, community is my North Star, and I love community. So that really helped me to create a space for others, particularly young people, particularly young racialized people, young women, girls, to see that this is something that is possible to do. And then, you know, if you yourself is not able to run, support a woman that's running. Support a candidate that's running, someone that you know is has what that thing is that you think is necessary for them to run. Support them.
It's everything that you're all saying is empowering, and for somebody, I guess, because I'm older, I've been able to travel and learn more, because I think that's another thing about talking to people who are not in your communities. You get to learn about other people. But I know there's a younger generation who's intimidated by the idea of putting yourself out there, especially if people can destroy you online. And this idea of civic responsibility may not be something that they're familiar with. Cynthia, you mentioned the importance of mentorship. I just wanted to get an idea from all 3 of you. How can we make politics a place where women can see themselves? Alexandra?
I think it starts with building the resilience of young people and young women in particular, and dealing, you know, we've been talking about gender violence. That's the extreme end, the lethal end of the gender imbalance. But we have so much subtle discrimination still happening. I mean, I look at, you know, how women are tone policed. You know, you can't have gray hair. You know, no one comments about a man's weight or his baldness, but heaven forbid that a woman gain 10 pounds, you know, and you in media understand that more than anyone.
I understand that, yes.
Yeah. So, you know, we need to build, as you have said, you know, strong, powerful women. And I know that happened to me through role modeling in my family. I grew up in a family of 3 girls, and then I went to an all-girls Catholic high school. So I was insulated from that, and the first time I encountered it, I was shocked when my all-Catholic girls high school merged with the all-Catholic boys high school. All of a sudden, I had male instructors for the first time who told me I didn't need to take math to be a wife. So it's the only time my mother intervened in my education, and she marched down to the principal's office and gave her a piece of her mind. You know, how dare you expose young women to this kind of misogyny? This was the 1970s. And then in
mom's a powerhouse.
and then in my legal career, when I was interviewing for jobs, we were asked whether we were married, whether we were in a relationship, what form of birth control do you use?
Can't do that anymore.
And shockingly, that is still happening today in more subtle ways, but it's still happening. So all
That
these
piece-
undercurrents are still there.
That piece about the resilience thing, because I think what's different for younger people, even my generation, is that we have more community online. We can find it online. So I think that resilience piece is important because you all didn't really have that back then.
No.
Cynthia?
No, we didn't. We didn't even have cell phones. We didn't have all that stuff. But we did have each other. And we did have I had very strong role models in my family as well. A lot of strong women in my family that have done some amazing things and had a lot of influence. So we have to do that for other younger women in our families and in our communities as well. When they see us doing things, then they know they can do that. And I've had women say, so this is what education will bring me, right? And it's like, yes, open your mind, right? Open your heart, get out there and do something. Because once you give up, and I think young women give up a little bit too early, too easy sometimes.
Why do you say that?
Like, you know, they have children early and then they figure that's it. And it's not it. I mean, there's lots of women who've gotten older and painted and changed the world in many fundamental ways by saying, wait a minute, I have more in me than that. So I think we really need to think about that. And we do need to mentor, and we do need to take young women out into places that they've never been before. People did that for me. There were a lot of people that were not Indigenous people, teachers and other people who said, it's going to be okay. You know, you're going to be fine. And if you need anything, I'm here. You know, yeah, there were some bad people too, let's be honest. But there were people who said, I can help you, and I can get you over here. And if you want this position, I can help you. So that's our job. And we have social capital as we get older. Use your social capital to lift other young people into the roles that they want to try out. No, they can't go right up to president. I keep telling you to start somewhere. But lift them so that they have the opportunities that you may have had in your life. Hand it on, what is it? Pay it forward. Mm-hmm. Yeah, pay it forward so that we get that. And it could be your niece or it could be the kid down the street. I've picked up many a kid from the ditch, native kids saying, okay, you can do better than this. And I'm going to make sure you do, and I'm going to help you get there. And my phone, here's my number. You call me no matter what time of day it is or how late it is at night. You call me if you need somebody to talk to.
That's amazing.
Because that's what they need. I had a kid say to me, I can do this, Cynthia. I just need to know somebody's got my back.
That's amazing. And Senator, what about yourself?
Wow. The whole piece around building a support around someone who is really focused on wanting to make a change in their life is so important. I think about, or take on a leadership role. Right? So politics could be one of those roles. And what you said prior, Alexandra, around being a single mom and not being able to leave your child, it's a reality of women's lives. Mm-hmm. But we haven't built the kind of system to support women to be able to do that as well as lead in the areas of their lives that they want to lead in. Mm-hmm. And so I think we really need to build that kind of support system. Now, I dare say if more of us beyond 25 to 30% were in leadership roles in politics, we'd probably come up with better policies in order to make that happen, right?
Yes.
So that's one of the reasons we need to have more women elected, because we can create the right policies in order to have a better gender balance in politics, right?
So if women actually ran, it could improve.
It could improve the outcomes, right? And then you could actually see more women in lead. I remember when Angela Merkel was chancellor in Germany, there's a story about a little boy saying to his dad asked him, what do you want to be? And he said he wanted to be something like a policeman or fireman. And his dad said, what about prime minister? Oh, I didn't know boys could do that. Because his whole life, all he had seen was Angela Merkel, right? So that piece matters. Being able to model what you see is really important, where it just becomes the norm.
Cynthia and Alexandra, I see you nodding.
I just wanted to commend to the audience. There's a fabulous skit on Baroness von Sketch on CBC. It envisions the year 2050 when all world leaders are women. And the world summits are handled in half a day as opposed to weeks and years. So it's a great sketch.
And Cynthia, I saw you nodding too, about like if women actually run in politics, it can actually change the situation.
Oh, absolutely.
When you win.
When they win, well, but even when you don't win, because
Yes,
I've run
that's
3
true.
times as well, and
Okay.
even when you don't win, it still had a tremendous impact. A lot of the kids in my community who never thought about anything outside of their own personal space actually got engaged. They did signs, they voted. And now they're voting, right? So they would never have voted if I hadn't run. So I think that that's an important consideration as well. Is that's the role modeling, right?
That's true. I've
That-
seen
you
it,
know,
yep.
so I mean, even if you don't win, I mean, sure, it's great to win, but it's also great to learn. And every one of those runs, I'm sure, taught you something, because I know they did me. And I think it's worthwhile. So don't be afraid to get out there and just do what you think is the right thing to do for the world in which you live. You know, I remember one of the elders saying that you have to live in the world in which you find yourself. And so we look back because I think it's important to never forget. And I, of course, teach wise practices, which means bringing that past into the present and actually giving it modern expression. But we're also looking forward. And in a country like Canada, right now, we need to be engaged. We don't want to become the 51st state, right?
Never.
Ever.
Never the 51st.
So we need to be involved. We need to protect what we have. And the best way to do that is to ensure that our young people are ready for that. Because they're the ones who are going to be leading. I know we all think we're going to live forever. We're not. They're going to be the ones that are leading. Let's prepare them.
We've got about less than 10 minutes left of our conversation, and I just wanted to wrap up with some key takeaways for the audience. Alexandra, I wanted to start with you. What's one thing Ontario municipalities can do to support Ukraine?
So we have a tradition of twinning with other cities, and I know that Toronto and Kyiv, Ukraine's capital, are twinned. There are many other twinning opportunities. And what that does is it signals to those cities that someone cares about them. There's been a lot of transfer of surplus goods to Ukraine that are vitally important, whether it's firefighting equipment or ambulances, whatever you have in the cupboard, if you can get it to Ukraine, that would be perfect. And that's happening on the provincial level. Recently, I witnessed a signing ceremony with Manitoba Premier Wab Kinew, twinning with the oblast or province of Kherson in Ukraine, which is partially occupied. And Premier Kinew was so eloquent in expressing how meaningful that was, both for Manitobans and for the Ukrainians.
And Cynthia, what would you say is one thing people can do to further reconciliation in this province?
Well, in this province, in every province across Canada, I think we have to have the conversation. It's not just a one-off. You can't expect me to come in and talk to your municipal staff and the mayor one time for an hour. Okay, we've done our job, now we're there. No, you're not there. I've been working on truth and reconciliation my entire life as an Indigenous person, and we're not there, and we're not even really close. But we are having conversations. We have a lot of incredible people across Canada that are doing this work, and they want to come and have that conversation with you. It's not just an academic exercise like, in universities and colleges. It's right on the ground. I have talked to a lot of municipalities, and I've worked with them. A lot of them have reconciliation action plans that they're developing. Do what you can, and I tell people it's not grand gestures. Learn something about the foundations of this country. That's why we're peacekeepers on the world stage. That is an Indigenous tenet. We started that. Make sure you know something about the treaty area in which you live, and teach your kids. This one guy was saying he took his 6-year-old up into the Muskokas, and they were standing looking at the vista of all these trees and this land, and he said, "What do you think?" He said, "I think it belongs to the Indians." He's like, okay. So he's been taught. But just have the conversation. Nobody's taking anything from you. It is a relationship into the future. So the municipalities having that conversation, they understand. We understand third-party interests, but do you understand the need to have Indigenous peoples at the table when some of these critical decisions are made under Bill C-5 and under Bill 5 provincially? There's a reason, not because they want to necessarily say no, but because they want to be able to have a hand in what's going to really deeply affect their communities as well. And they want to protect the water, and they want to protect those lands, and they want to protect the interests of everyone.
And it's also a way to build bridges between the communities.
Absolutely.
And Senator, what is one thing that people can do to improve gender equality in Ontario?
Well, I love this organization and the fact that you gather and you have these really critical conversations, and to include this topic as part of that going forward is amazing. I would like to encourage AMO to really think about how they can actually make it intergenerational. You know?
What do you mean?
And well, intergenerational in terms of what we've already talked about. How do we actually engage young people of all genders into the importance of gender equality and how it benefits them, how it shows up in their lives, so that there can be a cross-generational understanding of what young people are faced with, but also how they can be encouraged, mentored, sponsored to actually get involved in politics. A lot of people start at the municipal level. How can they get involved and really be engaged by having that gender lens so that they're not leaving anyone out of the conversation? And if we are truly not okay with having the imbalance that we have now, then perhaps that is an initiative that can be explored further, so that beyond this conversation, which I've really totally enjoyed, but that beyond this conversation, there could be an initiative that really engages young people into how to create a more gender balanced world, but a more social just world for everyone.
We have about 3 minutes left, and I wanted to give all of you maybe a minute each, just to give your final thoughts on women, the importance of women leading, and then, or on the work that you're doing. Alexandra, I'll start with you.
So Ukraine is much like Canada was in World War II now. You know, we had Rosie the Riveter. The men were fighting in the war, and women were taking on roles in the industrial complex. They were working in jobs that weren't traditional female roles at the time. And that is happening in Ukraine now. The men are on the front, and so women are 30% of Ukraine's armed forces are women, which is an astounding number in a society that was very different prior to the war, where it was tended to be a little male dominated. So, you know, I think the world is changing in Ukraine, unfortunately, for very sad reasons. But there are lessons for all of us in terms of the power of women and the role that we can play in various fields and aspects of our society.
And Cynthia?
I just think we have to have a lot of very difficult conversations in our households, in our communities, in our municipalities, and all the way up to the very top. We need to have some very challenging conversations about each other and about women in particular. We bring a lot to the table. I think we're increasingly seeing that. We do not want to go backwards, okay? Do not look at the United States and say, what a good idea. It's just not. We need to move forward, and we need to be the shining star globally about what we're doing as a country. Big, huge country, small population, but hey, lots of dynamite here. So I think we need to utilize that dynamite to our best advantage and stand very tall and very, very present on the world stage.
And Senator, I'll give the last minute to you.
I don't think I've ever been more proud to be a Canadian than now. You know, as a Black woman, as a racialized woman, someone who's been an advocate my entire life, I've never been more proud to be a Canadian, because I see us pulling together at a time that we need to do that. And I would love for us to be able to pull together for each other, right? So that we can actually be building the kind of country where we can all say equally and freely and powerfully that being Canadian is the greatest thing that we have, and that this is our money. This is the thing that we value most in Canada, is that we all feel that this is the country that we belong to, that we want to always promote, that when we travel, this is the country because of we fight for justice, we fight for gender equality, we fight for each other, and we all belong. And so for me, it's about creating that sense of belonging, right? That we all know we're looking after each other. We know we have vulnerabilities. How do we shore up those vulnerabilities for each other? How do we build the kind of policies and programs that support each other so that we can actually be, not just say, but be the greatest country in the world?
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
That is a great way to wrap this conversation. Thank you so much for being such great people to speak to. If you can just give them a round of applause. Thank you for being a great audience as well. Thank you.